All right, so for this question, first of all, let's try to keep it as simple as possible. Our task is pretty straightforward. Which finding, if true, would most directly support the researcher's conclusion? So just make sure it says support. Most of them do, but occasionally they throw a weakens in there, and that completely changes our answer. So we want to support it, and basically at this point, we're just looking to get some sort of dumb summary of what the conclusion is. And you can usually see words like concluded kind of standing out. They're not trying to hide the conclusion on you. So there is stuff we need to read ahead of time to get that backstory. But remember, the main meat of what we're focused on is probably going to start right here. So keep in mind, you don't need to understand everything that comes before it. Don't let it overwhelm you, especially because it looks very science-y just based on all those numbers that are in there. So let's just take a look. Rivers rich in sediment appear yellow, while increases in red algae make rivers appear red. To track things like the sediment or algae content of large U.S. rivers, John R. Gardner and colleagues used satellite data to determine the dominant visible wavelengths of light measured for various segments of these rivers. The researchers classified wavelengths of 495 nanometers and below as red, wavelengths between 495 and 560 nanometers as blue, and wavelengths of 560 nanometers and above as yellow. Okay, so I'm not trying to memorize that. It's here. If I need it, I can go back to it. That is just filler for me. I will deal with that as needed. Let's look at the conclusion. The researchers concluded that for the Missouri River, segments flowing into lakes tend to carry more sediment than those flowing out of lakes. So, okay, if I have my scrap paper, I might draw my lake and draw some arrows and be like, okay, segments flowing into lakes tend to carry more sediment. So high in sediment, low in sediment. Okay, great. So what did we learn about sediment? I feel like there was maybe something I can go back to here. Sediment appears yellow. So this is probably yellow, and this is probably not yellow. Right? So I don't know. I'm taking some guesses about what the conclusion is going to be here, but notice I don't really understand what I'm doing. I'm just kind of like copying things that they said, right? And I'm drawing these little arrows just to be like, okay, let me get something here. So let's see what we get. A, the segments of the Missouri River that had higher levels of chlorophyll A, which contributes to the green color of photosynthetic organisms, have dominant wavelengths of light between 490 and 560 nanometers. Okay, well, I don't remember anything about green, so this choice just seems like nonsense to me, right? I'm talking about yellow and sediment. This seems just like a random fact. So some of you are going to be like reading this and be like, oh my God, I didn't understand what I read. Oh, this is so bad. I'm lost in this question. Remember that most of the time that you don't understand something, it's because they left out the facts that you would need to actually understand it. So the problem most people have is they blame themselves for their confusion when the confusion is just like, the passage did not answer this question. So this, I'm pretty sure, is going to be wrong because this just seems like a random fact that we didn't talk about. So yes, I'm confused, but I'm not bothered by that. That makes me feel better because I'm like, okay, this choice is probably wrong because it's so confusing and has nothing to do with anything that I wrote down in my little dumb summary here. So let's continue. B, in lakes through which segments of the Missouri River pass, the dominant wavelength of light tended to be above 560 near the lake's shores and below 560 in the lake's centers. Well, again, my picture is not about the center versus the shore. It's about the in and the out. So I don't even have anything in the middle of that lake because that wasn't really part of the conclusion. So again, this seems to be bringing in something that doesn't matter. My gut tells me it's wrong. I can always revisit this if I get through all four answers and I'm like, oh, they all seem wrong. So let's just keep going here. C, the majority of the segments of the Missouri River were found to have dominant wavelengths of light significantly higher than 560 nanometers. Well, again, this has nothing to do with the lakes. Where are the lakes? The lakes were the whole point of the conclusion. They don't seem to be in here. So that seems like an important factor. Let's look at D. I don't know. I don't think C's right, but we got to look at D. Segments of the Missouri River flowing into lakes typically had dominant wavelengths of light above 560 nanometers, while segments flowing out of lakes typically had dominant wavelengths below 560. So I need to know what this means. Now I remember that they told me, but I don't remember exactly what it meant because I'm just going to go back. So let's see. What is the 560? It's right here. So 560, wavelengths of 560 and above are yellow. So we would say that this is probably 560 and above. This is probably 560 and below. So now let's go back to D and connect those dots. Does that make sense? Segments of the Missouri River flowing into lakes typically had dominant wavelengths of light above 560, right? Above 560, we're flowing into the lake. So that seems good. while segments flowing out of lakes typically had dominant wavelengths below 560. Below 560, below 560, out of the lake. That's 100% the answer. Now, I maybe even did more work than I needed for this question because A, B, and C were just totally random ideas. So even if you were not as confident in what was going on as I was when I summarized this thing, you still could have done a good job by taking my advice of like, don't let your confusion be this big moment of panic where you think you can't answer a question. Confusion is a natural part of wrong answers. If it's confusing, it's probably because they didn't provide that information. Hopefully though, even if you didn't quite understand everything that happened in the passage, you'd look at D and be like, okay, they're talking about lakes, they're talking about flowing in and out, that was the conclusion, so maybe I can connect these dots and understand the wavelengths, but there really wasn't even another answer that could even be considered. If we just thought about water going into and out of lakes, D was really the only one that made any sense. So try to keep it simple. I promise you the amount of information you need to understand from even the hardest passages in order to get the question right is much lower than you think. You think that you need to understand every single word or like 90% of what you're reading. No, it's much, much lower. Lower your bar and you will find that you are confidently picking answers without really understanding every single thing that you're reading. And that is okay, that's part of the strategy. You can always bookmark and come back later if you're unsure. But here, I don't think we did a lot of work and we got a very hard question right pretty confidently.